Are you ready, black people? Are you really ready? Are you ready to listen to all the beautiful black voices, the beautiful black feeling, the beautiful black waves moving in beautiful air? Are you ready, black people? Are you ready?
Nobody ever heard of the Harlem Culture Festival. Nobody would believe that happened.
6 weekends of major artists.
The Panthers were the security and kids were sitting up on the trees.
I was nervous. I didn't expect a crowd like that. Something very important was happening. It wasn't just about the music.
1969 was a change of era in the black community.
The styles were changing.
Music was changing.
And revolution was coming together.
We are a new people. We are a beautiful people.
That concert took my life from black and white into color.
We wanted progress. We are black people, and we should be proud of this.
We were coming together to say this was our world and how beautiful it was.
We're gonna try to sing a song together. Don't wait for your neighbor, because your neighbor might be waiting for you.
Wanna take you higher?
Are you ready?
Wanna take you higher?
We believed in what we felt in here. So when we went up, let's go. Let's go do it.
I want to welcome everyone to the Summer of Soul panel discussion. I'm so happy to have you all here today. And before we get started with the discussion, I want to introduce our panelists for this evening. And I'm going to go in not, alphabetical order, but in the way that I put it together. So bear with me. The first person on our panel is Dr. Daphne A. Brooks. She is the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of African American Studies, American Studies, Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and Music at Yale University. She is the author of Bodies in Descent, Spectacular Performances of Race and Freedom, 1850 to 1910. She is the winner of the Errol Hill Award for its outstanding scholarship on African American performance from ASTR, Jeff Buckley's Grace, and her most recent book, which everyone should get and support, Liner Notes for the Revolution, The Intellectual Life of Black Feminist Sound. She is currently editing an anthology of essays forthcoming from Duke University Press and culled from Black Star Rising and The Purple Rain, celebrating the legacies of David Bowie and Prince, an international 3-day conference and concert which she curated. Our next panelist, hailing from New Orleans, Melissa A. Weber is a Black music scholar who teaches a history of urban music course for the College of Music and Media at Loyola University, New Orleans. She also serves as curator of the Hogan Archive of New Orleans Music and New Orleans Jazz, a division of Tulane University's Special Collections. For the past 2 decades, and in her spare time, under the moniker of DJ Soul Sister, she has hosted her Soul Power show on WWOZ FM in New Orleans and was the first DJ to win a Big Easy Entertainment Award, and has performed with artists ranging from Questlove to George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. Her extensive collection of over 10,000 records earned her a spot in the book Dust and Grooves, Adventures in Record Collecting, and in Nelson George's documentary, Finding the Funk. Fredara Mareva Hadley has been an ethnomusicology professor in Juilliard's Department of Music History since 2018. Her core research considers how people of African descent use music genres to construct and maintain community. A native of West Palm Beach, Florida, she earned her undergraduate degree from Florida A&M University a Master of Arts in African American Studies from Clark Atlanta University, and a PhD in ethnomusicology from Indiana University. Hadley has been published in the Journal of Popular Music Studies, the ICTM Yearbook, Billboard Magazine, and other outlets. She has presented at meetings for the Society of Ethnomusicology, Society for American Music, International Council for Traditional Music Study Groups on African Music, and Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Her newest project focuses on Shirley Graham Du Bois, one of the earliest Black women musicologists and opera composers. Dr. Scot Brown is an associate professor of African American Studies and History at the University of California, Los Angeles. He is the author of the book Fighting for Us and has penned numerous articles on African American history, social, political movements, music, and popular culture. He is a contributing author and editor of the book Discourse on Africana Studies. He is in the process of completing a book project exploring the city of Dayton, Ohio, as the 1970s musical hotbed of soul and funk bands. Brown has appeared as an expert commentator on African American music and popular culture for many programs on television, radio, and social media. KLRU, National Public Radio, Sirius XM Radio, DATV, BET Centric, TV One, and VH1. Additionally, he has appeared in several documentaries on the civil rights and Black Power movements, including the PBS documentary, The Black Panthers Vanguard of the Revolution. And our last panelist, Tony Bolden, is Associate Professor of African and African American Studies at the University of Kansas, where he teaches and writes about Black music literature and political issues. The editor of the Langston Hughes Review, Bolden's publications include his first book, Afro Blue Improvisations in African American Poetry and Culture, which examines blues theory and Black resistance poetry, the funk era and beyond, new perspectives on Black popular culture, an edited collection of essays in the funk issue, a book-length guest-edited special issue of American Studies that includes 11 articles, as well as poems, paintings, and photos on the theme of funk. Bolden's most recent publication is his book, Groove Theory, The Blues Foundation of Funk, which is also a book that people should also get. Every book that I mentioned, people need to check out from each one of these panelists. They're all phenomenal. He is currently completing his book, tentatively titled Funk Aesthetics, New Directions in Black Literary Studies. Feel so privileged to have all five of them here with us this evening. But before I get into the questions, I want to say that we're going to have, I'm serving as the moderator, should probably introduce myself. I'm Chris Williams. I'm also a writer, and I work at the University of Mary Washington as the assistant director of the James Farmer Multicultural Center and Multicultural Student Affairs. I don't want to read my bio because I want to get into the talk, but I've done quite a bit of writing myself. But I feel privileged to be in this space, moderating this panel this evening. Just a couple of instructions as we move forward with the program. We're going to have about an hour and a half, possibly, of dialogue between the panelists on questions that I asked them. And then we're going to leave a portion of time for the audience to ask the panelists questions, and they'll provide answers to you all. So if you all could mute yourselves, that would be fantastic. Now, as we can get started with the program, I wanted to ask our panelists, my first question is, for many people, their definitions of soul means various things. How do you define soul, and is your interpretation of soul found within the Harlem Cultural Festival that is in the Summer of Soul Film?
Well, could I start by just thanking you, Chris Williams, and everyone involved for bringing us together? It's obviously a continuing challenge for us all to be together, and with a film like this, it reminds us of the importance of being together. And I think maybe I also want to maybe ask for just a brief moment of silence for the great Bob Moses, who we lost, and who made it possible for us to to imagine other worlds and liberated worlds. And I'll be very quick with my response and say that I think soul music is a music of ethics, Black ethics. That's how I'm going to answer that question. But rest in peace, Bob Moses.
I would agree, and I'm sorry for the bad lighting. I'm in Ghana right now, and it's nighttime and dark, and so no sunlight to draw upon to kind of make up for the inside lighting. But I'm very grateful to be here with all of you to talk about this film, which I wish I had been able to see, with people and in community. So this is a great way to bring an aspect of that in. Do I see soul? I'll answer the questions in reverse. I'll be brief as well. Do I see my definition of soul in the Harlem Cultural Festival? Absolutely. And the vision that we get in that festival is one that transcends narrow definitions of genre, right? We get everything from gospel to blues to, not in the film, but Olatunji was there as well as, the New Yorican and El Barrio incorporated in that. So I think we see the most expansive and diasporic view, which to me is the foundational view of what soul is and can be. We see it in transitions. We see generational shifts happening. Mahalia and Mavis and Gladys Knight, that's a couple different generations there. And so soul, I learned from Portia Malsby, soul is grounded in Black nationalism and notions of aesthetics of Black nationalism and how I read as Black sovereignty. And so absolutely on display in the Harlem Cultural Festival.
Yeah, if I could add also, I think that the elements of what soul means within its theological context of that, whatever that is that you can't lay your hands on, you can't smell, you can't grab, but you feel something there. So when you ask about the question for me is, do I feel soul when I experience this great work of art? And you feel it, and you're hard pressed to know and be able to clarify exactly all of what its proportions are. But you know that there's something that's beyond just the physical. You know that there's something that's beyond just sheer numbers and metrics of measurement that inspire something very positive. And so I think when the choice of the word soul, and that's why it overlaps with R&B, was, I think, in part the argument that music outside of the church could do some things that the church does for people when they experience it. And I definitely felt that, and to feel that through these different mediums, right? Not being in that physical space is a powerful achievement.
Yeah, if I can add on to what everybody has said, about soul being the feeling, and this is where I'm so excited to talk about this film. The soul is not just what is happening on the stage. It's the other cameras, the other character of the people that we see. That's the feeling. That's the soul right there. Summer of soul, summer of Black and brown, and it's funny because the percussionist Ray Barretto, he said at the end or at the beginning of one of his songs, that he has soul. And regardless of the genre, regardless of what is happening on the stage, this film is a manifestation of the feeling of soul power.
What they said. Well, I would just sort of point out, we look at it from a denotative aspect. The meaning of that word is very closely related to funk. And in the 50s, in fact, when people like Cannonball Adderley and so many people, Horace Silver, Wes Montgomery, it's a whole lot of them, Donald Byrd, when they began, this sort of, arguably the first funk movement, one of the things that, some of the writers pointed out was that, because they called it a soul movement too. And one of the things that they pointed out was that the qualities that are attributed to soul, the sort of truthfulness, the down to earthness, and all of that quality was originally associated with funky, but that was considered to be, a negative term. And so soul was a more, sort of a more palatable in some ways. And you can actually see the transition when Stevie Wonder in the film repeats the word, 4 times and then says, "Let's get funky." But, before this time, you really don't have, there's a kind of stigma for that word. And so I would say, yeah, I'm just sort of adding on to what everyone else has to say.
Thank y'all for your answers. My next question is, while watching the film, it felt like I was watching the curation of an album woven together by several genres. One of the things that stood out in the film was the power of Black musical expression, particularly the influence and musicality of Black women. Did you see the same thing? And why do you think it was significant for the director and producers to showcase the artistry of Black women at the festival?
All I can think is not so much the director of the film, but I'm just glad that the people who booked this festival included many of us. You know what I'm saying? And I saw a tweet from Questlove. Y'all are gonna love this. This is something I didn't know. Apparently, Mahalia Jackson was the highest paid artist out of the entire lineup. So that's very powerful, that we not only are included, but are we're at the table, but we are represented as headliners,
I mean, if anyone has read Aretha's, if anyone has heard Aretha talk about Mahalia, and may they both rest, she's talked about Mahalia gets that money. So that's also about a kind of, agency and, professional autonomy within the industry, which has not been afforded as many sisters as we would like. So that's a great anecdote. I think that, as my beautiful interlocutors have already reminded us of the ways that soul constitutes this hybrid formation of the sacred and the secular, we have to, of course, remember the leadership of Black women in the church and that kind of visibility, legibility, guiding voice. The voice that lines out for the choir is something that's very familiar to Black women, and that would have been, been familiar to those crowds. I I think what's exciting to me about that kind of visibility in this film is that there's so many different kinds of Black women on stage, right? From Marilyn McCoo, who's fighting authenticity politics, and to, of course, badass Nina, who's, ready to set everything off, right? To Mahalia and Mavis, and the intimacy between Mahalia and Mavis in terms of a kind of pedagogy that's on stage there, right? And that baton being passed to Mavis. That's history in the making, but it's also a reminder of all of these different ways that Black women artists have occupied the sonic realm and been so central to Black community building.
I would agree with what's been said and just add, one of the attendees commented and remarked on the presence of Cynthia Robinson in the film. And when she was playing with Sly and Family Stone, he was like, who ever thought of a woman trumpet player, right? Until he sees her on stage. And so you see the impact of women instrumentalists as well as vocalists, of which obviously she's both. And thinking about Gladys Knight too, who is a bit of an ingenue in this moment. She says herself, we are up and coming, right? And she's up and coming out of Atlanta through this Detroit Motown machine. And she talks about how much it meant to her. Marilyn McCoo spoke about this as well, how much it meant to her to be able to perform in Harlem. And she didn't say this, but I feel like part of what's happening there is because it reminds her of the Blackness of Atlanta and the Southernness of Atlanta, and just sort of that freedom of expression that exists, not just with the people on stage, but in fact, that freedom to exist on stage is coming from the audience, right? Sort of setting that atmosphere and giving permission that, yes, we want whatever it is you have to share with us, we want that. And that becomes a recurring theme with the performers, especially the women, talking about how much it meant to them. These are seasoned performers moving around the country, but to perform in Harlem in front of a predominantly, overwhelmingly Black audience, what that then gives to them on stage is just extraordinary. Yes, and Abby Lincoln, absolutely.
Scott, or? Well, one of the things that struck me about what you're asking, one of the, when I came into the academy, one of the statements that people would always say is, Black is not a monolith, but the people knew too. This is sort of what we see, and what, in conjunction with what some of the other observations are in terms of, the women's artistry, was the dancing. And, to see, I had never seen, that footage before. And I think the aesthetic, when we're talking about soul, and a sort of a spiritual ethos, that's actually expressed a lot through dancing, so that was one of the things that really caught my attention in different ways, in so many different iterations of it, so to see Nina Simone, Gladys Knight, and just all of these different ways that and different iterations of the dance moves were important to me too.
Sure, and in addition to even the artistry on the stage, just women as commentators, women as they were experiential curators of the moment. So, and through their commentary, you hear a lot about the gender dynamics in the community, about the young woman who has to have a story about where she is, right? And conceivably in ways that maybe her younger brother may not have even had to do similar kinds of things, right? To kind of let her whereabouts be known. Also, I was thinking about just the images, the diverse images of Black women of all age groups that you get, which is really a testimony to whatever that is that somebody behind the camera knows how to do to make you feel sound with your eyes, right? That's happening, and it's happening in such an inclusive way that actually centers women at various moments, both in terms of knowing about what happened and also what you experience when you see sound and played out in that environment.
I wanted my 2 cents, especially the 3 women that kind of jump out at me in the film. Obviously, Nina Simone, the lead singer for Walter Hawkins group. I do not know her name, but I was almost moved to tears during that performance of Oh Happy Day. And Sly Stone's sister, the interplay between both of them on stage. I couldn't take my eyes off of both of them. And then, you throw into the mix their brother, Freddie. So those 3 really captured my attention. So my next question is, at that point in time in 1969, there was a lot of things that Black America was living through. And the film, specifically highlighted how many of our leaders had been assassinated in prior years, and how our communities were being decimated by joblessness and poverty and the heroin epidemic. But considering this reality, several of the artists at the concert were singing and playing songs that were giving the audience some much needed joy and hope, but also expressing their pain. I wanted to ask you all to talk about the importance of music being an integral part of the communal Black experience.
Well, the great music critic Jason King has talked about soul conceptually and theoretically as being a music of getting togetherness, in his beautiful work that he's done on Roberta Flack. And so, we could be on the phone all day talking about the ways that Black sound has, constituted formations of community building and life-sustaining ways in which people developed social and cultural intimacies with one another. The extraordinary thing about this event is to imagine the ways that it mobilized a Black Commons, that we could actually have a Black Commons that was constructed around and for the elevation of and preservation of and sustenance of a multiplicity of different Black musical forms, and that could, thread through a community for an entire season. It's remarkable, and also obviously a typical American crime to not have had wide access to this history until now.
I would just say, I was just gonna say, music is the way Black people do life. And so even in the film, Greg Tate talks about, it has the rage as well as the joy, and all of that happens in the process of the music making. And I think when we think about all of the events preceding and going into 1969, you get all of that. You see, and one of the things that's so striking to me in listening to Jesse Jackson speak, and that powerful moment between Mahalia Jackson and Mavis Staples, which to me is the heart of the film, right? It happens somewhere around the center, is just how fresh these assassinations are for people. This all happened before I was born, and although this is my parents' story and all of that, I can't feel it the way that it felt when I was watching this film, and Jesse Jackson is describing Martin Luther King's last moments, and we know how close he was with Mahalia Jackson. The Staple Singers were involved with him as well, and this community who loved him, and Martin Luther King had spoken at Riverside down the street, and had all of these relationships in Harlem. All of that feels very visceral, even watching it on screen over 50 years later. And so you get the sense that people are literally helping each other work through this moment, whatever it is, as a community, community of Harlem, community of people at this particular event, community between the audience and the performers. All of that is swirling around at the same time, and music is a facilitator for all of that. One quick personal note, my parents are waiting to get into the Zoom. Can you please admit them? They're like texting me like, we're here. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to add to what was said. Of course, all of it's very important. But I think also it's a question of how the communal function of music gets played out within the social politics of the era as well. So on one hand, on a very organic level, you can't even talk about Black community without talking about music in so many ways that are just about our daily existence. But then when you now think about the way that the Summer Music Festival, not just that particular one, but the Summer Music Festival as part of the way that cities are negotiating the upheavals that are happening at the time. So with the Watt Summer Festival of 1965, all the way up. So I kind of saw this moment as a kind of crystallization of things that are happening in a lot of different cities. No accident that it's parks and recreation that is given really the bureaucratic structure to met this kind of cultural experience out. And so in cities that are much smaller, what they don't have is top of line artists coming in, but they have mobile stages that Parks and Recreation are setting up for various very local concerts. And so I think in that regard, this is where I understand the sloganizing of Black Woodstock as a way of trying to explain to people why something is significant. But what makes it very different in the whole music festival history of this period is that they are, in many ways, extremely local events. So the population of people from Woodstock that went to Woodstock is immaterial compared to all the numbers of people that were there. Whereas this is, even though there are people that I talked to just someone yesterday who said he's from LA and he's an older gentleman. He said, you know, I heard about that festival and it made me go to Harlem the next year. But the point was that, you know, this is something that really is the way that urban centers are kind of negotiating with local community, utilizing a lot of the cultural experiences and institutions, but putting them in a different context. And I also just want to add that it's no accident that it's at Mount Morris Park, which was a pre-existing gathering spot for lots of speakers and political activism, which is now Marcus Garvey Park, because of that reason. So anyway, I just want to think about communal music in that wider social and political context as well.
Yeah, to tag on to that, thinking about the community part, oh, wow. When you think about the wide range of music that was presented and entertainment, because they were the comedians as well and the dancers, the range of ages that you saw in the audience, I was like, could something like that actually happen today in this world of target marketing and genre separation? You saw young kids all the way up to elders, and, you know, community in the truest sense of the word, so that it was people that may not have just been there for the music, but for that community gathering.
Well, sort of piggyback on what, Melissa said and everyone else, one of the things that sort of connects everything is a spirituality. I was glad that Greg Tate talked about spirit possession, as an African derived, sort of precept has been really important in terms of the music making. But, that's, you can see how that's a kind of an interconnector there, in terms of the intergenerational kind of thing. But what's also, ironic to me is, that there were all these stigmas about the phenomenon and the expressions related to it, whether we're talking about sounds, that is to say sound quality, timbre, body movement, aesthetics rather, as far as clothing, but a whole range of different things. And in fact, it's an epistemological, device. And, you could see one of the ways in which this kind of, consciousness is brought to bear in the film, because, they start talking about going to the moon, and all the Black folk have a different, kind of story about that, and the music is gonna, they were gonna do some kind of levitation too, but it wasn't a physical one; it was a metaphysical one, And but in a real sense, what you see in terms of this communalism, this collectivity, is less. You don't really hear a lot of protest as such. Because, today people talk about protest and, so less about what they oppose, but more about what they propose. And the music is ultimately at the core of it, it is invoking a very different kind of political economy. The question is, what constitutes value? What constitutes knowledge? What constitutes know-how? What are the criteria? Who determines it? They're talking, somebody else just went to, well, it wasn't the moon, but wherever these people just went, a week ago, same kind of inequity, and so that's sort of what, was interesting to me about, the sort of collectivity.
One of the moments in the film, Miles Marshall Lewis's father was in the film, and he talked about how he was a Motown guy. We were suit and tie guys, and the minute he saw Sly and the Family Stone on stage, he was like, "We're no longer suit and tie guys. We're Sly." And I thought that was really, it was, for me, it really encapsulated the shift that Black music was going to take in the next decade. Because here you are, in '69, and Sly with funk, with the psychedelic funk and all that. And then how they were really pushing the envelope. And I was just like, wow. I was like, he's right, because that's where the music was going, where Sly was taking it. Did you all feel the same way in that moment when you saw Miles' father, say that?
Well, being from the Bay Area, it was an affirmation of the world that had already appeared to me multiracial and cross-gender and reclaiming rock as a Black multiracial endeavor. You know, in the shadow of psychedelia and the Summer of Love, as it was revolutionized on the West Coast and mythically racialized as it shouldn't have been. And so, you know, it felt it in the sense of especially this film and this event, it was a reminder of the capaciousness of Blackness, and you know, seemed to sum up all of the different heterogeneous dimensions of Black sound and visuality, and aesthetics, you know, more broadly, that we see across the board on the stage. And that is a kind of radical curation that, you know, we have to thank Tony and the team for, to be bold enough to literally imagine a big tent that could make room for, you know, letting, as Jimmy would say, our freak flags fly high.
I think it's also, it's a great moment of kind of a trend. I wouldn't say transitions. I think it's going to play out over the course of a few more years of the shift from the vocalists up front. We're still seeing the vocalists up front for the most part, but then you're also seeing with the Chambers Brothers and with Sly and the Family Stone, the self-contained band, you know, it's stepping its way into the forefront. But it's also this, with the self-contained band, you also have, you know, Motown singers like Stevie Wonder who are going to actually change their whole kind of approach to music and also their messaging. So it's so interesting because, you know, we think of so many of these artists as these huge icons. And so you're catching Stevie Wonder before he's Stevie Wonder of the 70s, but he's no longer little Stevie Wonder either, right? So, and you can see it going, he's got the ruffles, you know, you know, all of that is sort of taking you there, but Marvin Gaye's What's Going On had not yet fully had the transformative effect on soul. So I think there's so much there that we can think about in terms of all these cross currents that are going back and forth and around in that part.
I would like to think that the filmmakers, in my mind, I'd like to think that the filmmakers purposefully chose to end the film with Higher, that live performance by Sly and the Family Stone, to contrast them also doing it, the song being featured in the Woodstock film. So much of the Sly and the Family Stone legacy, I feel personally, has been obscured. I know that Questlove is working on a Sly Stone documentary right now, and I hope that he does for the Sly Stone legacy what he has and his team have done for this Summer of Soul. But it is powerful in that they close with Higher to show the love that Sly and the Family Stone had in the Black community. And we can see it in this film because we have in this film what we did not have in Woodstock, and that is the sun. The sun, which we see everybody and their reactions. Because in Woodstock, Sly and the Family Stone played in the middle of the night, and you don't see what, you can hear a crowd, but you don't see it. So not only can we see the excitement and the pushing and the fists in the air and the peace signs in the air, but you see that it is Black and brown people giving that. And to me, that is very powerful. And it kind of sums up the fact that for me, Summer of Soul is about the Harlem Cultural Festival, and it is also not just about the Harlem Cultural Festival. It is about Black and brown people in this moment in time, and it shows the power. So the Sly piece is very powerful to me.
I would echo. So One way to think of this is, you know, a collectivity and an alterity that's based on or that reflects, you know, Black vernacular values, right? The values in the music itself, which so Daphne said, so is Black ethics. I've never heard that before. I'm like, yes, right? So at the core of that is love. And, you know, that's what Sly, you know, signifies. In the year before that, Love City, right? And now, recently, you know, a couple years ago, you know, we were talking about Black love, right? He was talking about it, you know, years ago. But it is a collectivity that is inclusive, right? It is based on what you do, not on who you are, on things that you can't, you know, control. And what was so powerful, excuse me, is that he exemplifies that alterity. You know, he has a fundamentally rebellious sensibility. You know, it is contrarian fundamentally. And I didn't know that was Marshall's father. So I'm glad you pointed that out, because, you know, his statement about, you know, not, you know, like, you know, not dealing with the suits after that, it is indicative of a larger sort of impact that Sly Stone had. So just really briefly, so Rufus was the original band members who created. They thought of Sly Stone as a model. So, you know, that's Shaka Khan's, you know, entrance. Betty Davis cited Sly Stone. Obviously, we know of, you know, Miles Davis, but also Herbie Hancock. So they played, Mongo Santa Maria played the Watermelon Man. That's Herbie's composition. And he talked about, you know, the change that he makes musically in the early 70s as being influenced by Sly Stone. And he also, in the process, talked about those stigmas. And he's like, you know, bump that, right? You know, and you know, actually wrote a song entitled it Sly. And we can go on and on. But oh, last thing. So I'm from the Bay too, Daphne. I didn't know, right? So I come from the Black part of Berkeley. I lived in Oakland too. But okay, Black Panthers. Now, Sly Stone's political philosophy was quite different from, you know, Huey P. Newton's, et cetera. The power, though, he was a revolutionary artist. And sometimes, you know, we think in narrow terms or narrowly about, you know, ideological conditioning and things like this. But Ricky Vincent points out that that the Panthers actually played Sly Stone's music. They would change the words, right? So he was powerful in ways. Charlie Wilson talks about him being, you know, a model. So, you know, I think I was really glad to see, you know, Sly Stone and Sly and the Family Stone, the collective, as Scott points out. I mean, that's another thing, you know, they actually then sort of model this collectivity as music groups. Eventually, the whole notion of individuality gets questioned in certain ways later on. But I was glad to see that that people now can get a sense of why Sly Stone was really important. Because when I've taught this in class, a lot of times with students, it's really hard for them young people, to see. All right, I'm talking too much.
I'll be really quick. I'm still thinking about what Melissa said about contrasting the two performances of Higher and the Sun, and you could see the people and see their engagement, see them bum rushing the stage, as Daphne pointed out as well. And I'm thinking about how, in this question about transitions, the music is changing also because people's actual lives are changing, the cities are changing. And so in the film, they talk about the hold that heroin is starting to have in Harlem, but at the same time, I think it is the same woman. She comments that Harlem is our Camelot, right? They're like, this is a place of beauty and love and community. And I think that's really important because we're also at the beginning of starting to paint Black neighborhoods in cities with terms like urban decay, urban blight, all of that policing and dismissive and predatory, quite honestly, language that we would start to use in the 70s and help to entrench our ways of thinking about cities and Black people and criminal justice and policing, all those things. We're at the edge of that. And so these are people who are very able and willing to see the intense beauty in a historic place like Harlem, which represented so much to generations of migrants over the decades leading up to this moment. But as that tone towards areas like Harlem is starting to really set in, and I think I said something about this in the chat, but one of the things that's so striking to me about this film, and going back to Melissa's comment, is how much it focuses on the Black people who are just there, right? The film starts out with a lot of ambient crowd noise, just people out there, right? And that's important, again, as we're starting to get into this era of increased policing and de-investment in cities. Black people gathering has always been an act of resistance in this country, something that has been legislated against, right? And so the fact that you had over 300,000 Black folk over the course of these events at a free festival in the park, coming out, enjoying themselves, hearing the range of Black musical expression is something that we ought to keep at the center of how we talk about music festivals in this country. I said in the chat that very often when we talk about music festivals, we do not talk about music festivals that target Black audiences. That they don't make it into these conversations. We don't talk about Wattstax. We don't talk about the Harlem Cultural Festival. We don't talk about Essence, which is one of the largest music festivals and longest running music festivals in this country. We do not bring them into those conversations, which means that we don't bring Black music fans and community into these conversations. And so, if one of the greatest interventions I think Summer of Soul makes is that it won't let us just look at the acts on the stage, right? We hear how they feel about performing in Harlem in front of what they recurringly refer to as their people. We hear what the audience thinks about seeing their idols in front of them in their neighborhood for free. All of that is just incredible when we pull those threads together, particularly at that moment in time.
One of the things that you mentioned, the Black Panther Party, Shaka Khan, she was involved with the Black Panther Party, I believe as a 16-year-old in Chicago. And then you had the Panther 21 case going on in Harlem at the same time as the festival was going on. The Young Lords Party was just getting established as well. There's always been that relationship between music and social justice. And I think particularly Black music, that's always been our reality, as Fadara was mentioning. All of the things that she mentioned, I mean, it's, yeah. So I won't belabor the point, but I think about how the film starts out with Stevie Wonder drumming, and the presence of the drum and the presence of the piano, and how other percussive instruments have always been important in the history of Black music. Did you all see the same connections there with the? All right, Scott, go ahead.
Well, I was actually just agreeing with you, but yes, I saw that. But I think, starting it off with the drum solo in that way, one, it's part of making it very clear that even the notion of Stevie Wonder as a musical wonder, right? That only something like soul, only something transcendent, only something otherworldly and beyond can help you appreciate what he's able to accomplish musically. And the way that also he feels things that sight doesn't convey. And also he feels people, he feels the crowd. I was watching how he was engaging them in conversation, but even the way when I was listening to the drum solo, I was listening for where he's not playing, the pauses, and also the response of the crowd as an equal percussive dimension to that expression. So, if you're talking about a solo by Billy Cobham or somebody who's going to show you how fast they can do something, that's not what you're going to miss it, just like you would miss the funk if you were looking for that. But if you're looking for that dialogue that he's doing in the solo, I watched it about 5 or 10 times, and I still can't memorize in my head the pattern that he's doing. Usually I listen to a beat and I can go boom, boom, pop, pop, boom, 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 and I have it in my head. I haven't figured that out yet, because there's something there that I think, and I like someone like Questlove because he's a drummer. So his own knowledge of music as an instrumentalist actually comes out in some of these choices. And I'm sure similar things could have been done with other instruments and other artists in the show. So I don't want to make this an exceptionalist argument, but his particular lens, which has made him such a special kind of artist and curator of art, I think comes through in that choice and in the nature of the solo itself.
It had to be drums. It had to be, but not only because of Questlove, but as we all know, right, as an instrument of insurgency and freedom and coded language and Black diaspora. But it's beautifully disconcerting, because how many films can we think of from the past that open with a drum solo, right? And to think about, again, that kind of recurring trope of the drums that I think is really intricately and subtly outside of that opening woven into the fabric of the narrative that he gives us about the festival is, calling out to a trans-historical kind of way that Black folks have communicated with each other in the spaces of being denied privacy, of being able to create our own forms of communicative, life worlds and connections through a specific kind of instrumentality. I'm so sad because this is such a beautiful conversation. I'm gonna have to peel off in just a second. So forgive me when I do, but I want to thank everybody, because this is the kind of thing that we need. So.
I mean, I'll add to be quite honest with you, for me, seeing that drum solo of Stevie Wonder at the beginning, because the first time I watched the film was when it was online for Sundance Film Festival. And for me, it was just like a shot warning, like, get ready, hold on to your seat, because my mouth dropped. I didn't even know Stevie Wonder played the drums. So that's all it meant for me, like, oh, you don't know what you're in for. And we're setting this up at the start to let you know we're about to go on a ride.
Everything everybody else said, I would just add, there's a moment before he plays the drums where he's at the front of the stage and he's saying, you know, he's kind of clapping. He's like, we got to get a groove growing, right? Like, and it's kind of slow. And he's just like, and to me, that is a bit, that is essential in order to get to the drum solo, because that is him coming to the front of the stage with a level of vulnerability and establishing rapport with this audience, kind of that sort of notion that recurs through African and Black music of collective music making, right? Like, this is something that we're doing together that then creates the space where he can then take to the drums and articulate himself in a more sort of energetic manner. Because at first he's like, it's raining, and, you know, like he had to work up to that place where he could give us that virtuosic drum solo, and he could not do that alone. And so, and to me, that opening that he does astutely and very skillfully is a performance of a type of ritual. It's an opening ritual to set the stage for the performance to have. And, you know, the late musicologist Samuel Floyd in The Power of Black Music taught us about these things, and how that is something that, whether we know it or not, we carried with us into the diaspora in terms of the ways of making music that are essential. And so it is that whole seamless, you know, sort of movement from him sort of acknowledging, like, how am I about to really make this happen outside in the rain, to build to where he made it happen, is extraordinary.
I was still listening to you, Fidera. So, well, I don't know, you know, for me, everybody's pretty much said, you know, anything. And to be honest, I didn't realize the implications of this when I looked at it. So just to be, you know, in all honesty, but listening to you, and when you ask a question and listening to everyone else, what comes to mind is that the music of at least some of the bands in that era played rhythms that were very close, at least from what I've read. I'm not a musician, so, you know, but from what certain musicologists that I have read have said, that there were similarities between some of the rhythms that the bands played. Now, you know, there wasn't a specific mention of Stevie Wonder, but James Brown and Sly Stone. And I think in a broader sense, you know, it sort of takes us back to, you know, the spirit, or, you know, Fidera talked about, you know, power of music, and, you know, this emphasis on what is African derived. This is a time when people are actually demonstrably claiming this. You know, there are all sorts of different ways, obviously, that we can assert, you know, Blackness or interpret this, but, you know, one of the, you know, the cornerstones of racial ideology, you know, we've often talked about phenotype, but we seldom talk about philosophy. And, the cornerstone, was the idea, was epistemological, that we ain't got no sense because, we engage in this stuff, right? That it's not rational, et cetera, right? All this other kind of stuff. And it's at this particular time, as a result of the Black Power movement and all the different things that are going on, that young people in particular are able to question and rethink the criteria and and claim these different aspects of the legacy and reinterpret them in new ways. So that's sort of what I was thinking as everyone else was talking.
When I was watching the film, I couldn't help but be really captured by the story of Pop Staples. I personally love that man. I don't mind sharing that bias, but learning more about his background growing up in rural Mississippi, having to drop out of school at 8th grade, using his first $5 check from picking cotton to buy his first guitar, teaching himself how to play. And in many ways, the history of Black music has been a result of how this country and industry has exploited us, but somehow we've maintained our dignity, innovation, and capacity to create profound art. Do you agree with this statement? Why or why not?
Say it again. I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said, in many ways, the history of Black music has been a result of how this country and industry has exploited us from time to time. But somehow we've maintained our dignity, innovation, and capacity to create profound art. Do you agree with that statement? Why or why not?
Absolutely. Leroy Jones, before he changed his name to Amiri Baraka, and Blues People talks about this. He talks about, everything that Black people are creating musically is an act of survival and just literally trying to create ourselves. There's no such thing as a Black American until, we are brought here. And music then, with so many things taken away, music becomes so much of how we encode ourselves in this place, right? And so, there's so many layers of things that get packed into our musical expressions, right? Because they have to, for such a long time, for real, before, it was legal for Black people to learn how to read and write. All of it had to find its way in the music, and that has continued to be the case. And so the innovation happens because, in so much of Africa, again, music is how people do life. You sing as you go to get your water. You sing as you go fishing. You sing as you go to do the activities of life, right? There's a song or a piece of music that accompanies every aspect of what's happening in traditional African society. So that's the framework. But then when you add the complexity of life as an enslaved person, and then as a person in a country that never intended you to be free, right? That innovation gets supercharged because it has to, right? It has to serve so many different purposes, both for the performer and for the listener. And again, I think Greg Tate's commentary in the film is great because it isn't just one thing. It is both the individual processing of one's own existence, as well as this communal aspect. It is the individual inside of the whole. It is the transcendence and spirit possession that we see and that he talks about. But it is also the groundedness and the tetheredness to the the juxtapose, as we were hearing earlier from Dr. Bolden, like juxtaposing people going to the moon and Black people saying, wait a minute, what about right here on Earth, right? It is all of those shifts and embodiments that people are trying to reconcile and hold at the same time. And so one of the ways it shows up with you mentioned Pop Staples, and I love him too, and the Staples singers as well. He's saying, Mavis Staples talking about, we sing gospel. This is what we sing, right? That's what we sing. We're singing about Jesus, and not realizing that her father is playing the blues the whole time, right? So even within one familial musical unit, people are bringing different perspectives and understandings of what is actually happening in the moment, but ultimately finding that they are reconcilable and they are compatible. And Black music does this in a million different ways over and over again because we need it to. So I would absolutely agree with that statement.
I agree as well. And your question included the word dignity. And my mind immediately went to that scene with Gladys Knight and the Pips, and Gladys Knight talking about how at Motown, they were taught to be dignified and they had the training and the choreography. But in that moment on the stage at the Harlem Cultural Festival, they felt a different way and they went against what the Motown dignified training would have told them, and instead raised the fist. And I've seen this film, I'm embarrassed to tell you how many times I've watched the film. I've seen it a few times. And so you see each one of them, you have to look real close, but each one of them raises the power fist. And that's sort of a different look at the concept of dignity.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to what Melissa just shared, in that it's sort of like, it's not like, okay, that's the end of respectability. It's just expanding what respectability means so that it's inclusive of this sentiment of resistance, as opposed to just being, okay, the suit and tie thing. And that happens so much so that eventually Motown has to catch up to where the people are. And the artists are actually closer to the people than the kind of corporate entity, that they are, working for. And so that's another kind of, I love that moment that Melissa just shared, because like some of the others in this event, it's sort of like you can see a transition point or some place in the process that's not yet all the way finished, in this transition, because Motown artists in just maybe 2 or 3 years later are going to look more like Sly Stone than they do the buttoned up tuxedo, right? So they're going to look more like Marvin is going to look in the 70s than they look with Marvin in the earlier 60s.
Well, what everybody else said. I would only add that there's a philosophical aspect to this too, right? So African peoples, at least what we developed here, contrary to conventional wisdom, European philosophers did not discover, the fiction of binary logic or binary oppositions. This was a practicing everyday principle, work-a-day precept among blues people. And actually, there's evidence that it preceded that. And so what I'm talking about here is the way in which, we created art. So that kind of negativity, people today might, the term flipping is appropriate, but there's more to it than that. So it wasn't, so you could say a kind of symbolic inversion, but it really had to do with how people, looked at the world, and so they didn't have, the kind of control to prevent certain kinds of material exploitations or forms of exploitations, violence and all of that, right? But they were very their philosophical constructs were very well suited to understand and make sense of the contradictions that they lived, and to figure out a way to assert the principles within the hell of slavery, Jim Crow. The blues actually used to mean sadness, like, in other words, like complete sadness. And the music is a way to expel that, right? It's a way to get rid of the blues, right? So, and we can go on and on, but I mean, that's sort of, that's what I would add to this.
So this is kind of a question that I would like to know more from you all about. I'm sure the audience too. What were your top 5 moments from the festival, and why were they your favorite moments?
I think I need to think. I will tell you the 2 points that made me cry. Now, like I said before, I've seen this film more than a few times. And there are 2 points that always make me cry, just tears. I don't even have to try. One is the 5th dimension sequence, because as Dr. Brooks mentioned, the authenticity politics, each one of the performances is not simply a performance on its own. There's this other story that goes along with it in the film. And Marilyn McCoo talking about them just wanting to share their music, and people saying that they were not Black enough, but then performing for their people and being received and accepted. And if you look real closely, again, if you have a chance to see this film a few times, there are people from the audience that get on stage with them and are dancing with them. They get such rapturous applause, and the group members are shaking hands with people in the audience. And that just made me cry. Of course, obviously, the one everyone talks about, Mavis Staples and Mahalia Jackson. And of course, it hits different when you know how close Mahalia Jackson was with Dr. Martin Luther King. She was the sequence about everyone talking about the moon landing. I love that so much. I don't know. I just love all of it. I'm also going to shout out the B.B. King performance, because it just made me want to move and groove. And as someone commented on Twitter, you know, we forget there are young people who don't know who any of these artists are. And one person said, that's the first time they ever saw B.B. King perform standing up. Because if you remember later in life, B.B. King, he always performed sitting in the chair. So that's powerful too. Just so many, I can't think, just the whole thing.
It's hard to say. And, you know, I already spoke about Mavis and Mahalia. The first time I watched it, it just floored me and I cried. It was just raw and emotional, and I just had to process it. But maybe because I'm sitting in Ghana, I was also particularly struck by, again, how diasporic it was and Africa was represented. And I was thinking about the presence of Hugh Masekela, who I adore, and thankfully got to see before he passed, and the performance of Abbey Lincoln and Max Roach of Africa. And so those two performances in particular, when I think about them together, they're complementary, and both Africa reaching towards the diaspora and the diaspora reaching back towards Africa. And, you know, in a very kind of symbiotic relationship. And Hugh Masekela's son talks about how much his father loved Harlem, right? His father, Hugh Masekela, went to Manhattan School of Music, which is in Harlem, and lived in Harlem, and really was a part of the community of Harlem at a moment where Black Americans were really come to understand what the oppression of apartheid was. And so you have the sort of retethering of these ties of struggle, a Pan-African struggle, which had been there, right? But this is another moment of when they are kind of fanned. And we know the work that Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln had done throughout the 60s in their career, both their artistry and their advocacy. So again, and I think about how often these conversations and these kinds of performances are put out of reach of Black community. And so the fact that the community, all they got to do is walk down the street. You don't have to pay no fee. You ain't got to RSVP. You get to just show up and have all of these different interpretations and points of origin within Blackness all put before you. That message was really strong for me, particularly in those two performances, which were just so striking. And, you know, to see Hugh Masekela as a young person and all of, you know, really just kind of coming into himself was beautiful to behold as well.
I think really it's, you know, depending on, you know, when and where you enter with this, because I've been kind of obsessing over this over the last week or so. I think it's almost an unfair question, actually, because what I really should say is the whole thing, right? Because we're only really at the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding the centrality of audiovisual archives of the Black experience that this powerful intervention takes us. Then we're at probably the tip of the iceberg, even in learning more about all of the things that happened just in that Summer of Soul event. The longer performances, or all the things we're going to constantly be discovering. So every time I look at it, I'm struck by people that I'd never seen live before. I know about the Chambers Brothers. I'd never seen them perform as a self-contained unit in that composition before. So, you know, it's really going to be, I think, like the experience, it's going to be a process, because you can't, the numerous times that Melissa says she's seen it and she's got some continuities, but then she's also seeing all these other details. And I think this is what's going to make this something that's going to always invoke different kinds of emotions, because there's so much in this, you know, this cultural artifact to learn more about and to engage. I mean, and that's not a cop-out, but I just wouldn't do justice to it if I said, oh, the Stevie performance, because I can't do it. It's too much.
So here's, rather than actually talk, what I would rather do is hear, ask Melissa a very quick question and then ask Dr. Hadley a question. So Melissa, when they said, you know, people said they hadn't heard, I guess you said that they had only seen B.B. King play standing up, and then some people said they hadn't seen these people before. What did, if they talked about B.B. King at all, what did they have to say? I'm just curious.
Oh, the person tweeting said that they had never seen B.B. King perform standing up because they had only seen him, you know, toward the end of his life sitting down. And, you know, that they were astounded. They just loved seeing it. It was on Twitter, so very short. That was pretty much it.
No, that's important. You know, I mean, I think that's sort of, you know, the lack of, you know, I said I wasn't going to talk. I'll get this in later on. So Dr. Hadley, all right. So you were talking about the proximity, you know, people could just walk out, you know, down the road, not down the road, around the corner, you know, and, you know, that there wasn't a kind of distance in every sense of the term here. So, you know, you've talked about this, but also not just why is it important, but can you think of a way that we might be able, even if we can't do it, you know, of how we might address something like that, you know, moving forward?
That's a great question. And I think, you know, people are thinking about that same thing and having a mixed bag of results, right? I think there are several things that made this festival successful that people might look to. One was they didn't have a ton of money, but they had some. They had a key sponsorship. They had support from the municipal authorities, in this case, the city. You had backing from the Parks Department, which still in New York City, I live in Brooklyn. The Parks runs one of the largest summer music festivals in the country with Summer Stage, which happens in communities. It happens at Central Park, but it also happens in all 5 boroughs, where they are often bringing top tier, amazing artists that are culturally specific to the neighborhoods and parks that they're going into, and free for people, right? And so but all of that takes resources and commitment, and even above the resources, people who care enough to program things well. And so Tony Lawrence, we haven't talked enough about him tonight, and his role in selecting artists that would electrify the people in the community. He knew who these people wanted to see. He understood that. He understood how to build. This just wasn't one event, but a series of events. He knew how to build. There are themes, if you look at who the headliners were, that worked well, that aren't canned, but somebody who cared enough to be able to think through those kinds of cultural nuances, because he was from the community, right? And so doing all those things well often separates, we have fancy words like community engagement or community outreach now to kind of describe these efforts. But when people do it well, and there are individuals and institutions who are doing it well or doing it better, it's when you have those things in place, right? And so I think that is a huge lesson that the Harlem Cultural Festival and Summer of Soul teaches us. And let me add one quick thing. I mentioned Hugh Masekela earlier. This was 1969. And I realized Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire is 1974. right? And so 1974, Hugh Masekela would envision the concert in Zaire, where he would bring some of these same artists, including B.B. King, Celia Cruz, and Johnny Pacheco, as well as James Brown, right? Just an incredible array of artists to Zaire to perform before Rumble in the Jungle. If you haven't seen the documentary, Soul Power is out there. It's about that concert along with Congolese artists. And I have to believe now that what happens at the Harlem Cultural Festival helps to set the stage or plant the seed for what he would do in Zaire in 1974.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And in both cases, both Harlem and in Zaire, you've got politics involved in the utility. So 74, you also have the 6th Pan-African Congress. And so there's a way that the music festival also is operating within a political context. I just wanted to add that dimension to it, which just showing the continuities of what kinds of things we might have to look for going forward.
I think we also, Vidar, you were you were right ahead of me, because my next thing was going to be about Mr. Lawrence. I'd be remiss if I didn't, get in a question about him. But I also wanted to point out the fact of Harry Belafonte's influence of getting Hugh Masekela to be at the Harlem Cultural Festival. I think Harry Belafonte is one of those people, God bless him, he's 94 now. Even though we still see him a lot, he still doesn't really get the credit, he deserves. He really doesn't. And I was really happy to see his inclusion into the film, because he was the reason why Hugh Masekela came here, not only here, but to London, because he sponsored him. That's a whole nother conversation. That it's 6:30. I'm not going to get into that, but I think Harry Belafonte definitely was worth a mention. But Tony Lawrence, I mean, the fact that he was able to get a sponsorship from Maxwell House Coffee of all companies, right? I want to know that story, how he got Maxwell House on board to provide funding for the festival. But one of the things that stood out to me during the film was not only just his ability to command the audience, but his flair, his wardrobe choices. I take all that and how colorful they were, and over the course of 6 weeks, how difficult that is to be able to maintain the interest and bring all of these artists together, and maintain that continuity, and having 50,000 people. The Panthers provide security. I forgot to even mention that, because NYPD didn't really want to provide security for the festival. So there you go again with politics and music, right? It's all together. But anyway, how did you all kind of see Tony during the course of the film? What type of thoughts did you have on his presence and his influence?
Yeah, his confidence was one of it struck me, and that's also one of my favorite moments in the film, is when the mayor, John Lindsay, stops speaking, and then he wrangles him back around. He says, "We're gonna sing, knock on wood." He's just comfortable. And that's another thing I want to mention too. Just a quick diversion is this thread on Mayor John Lindsay. I didn't know anything about him at all. And so I went on, I did a little Googling to learn, and all I saw was negative things that I read. Now, I didn't do any extensive research. I just did a quick Google. But in comparison to what we see in the film with Reverend Al Sharpton saying that he was a stand-up guy and the member of the Black Panthers saying, quote, he was a hellified man. Again, rewriting perhaps revisionist history. But yeah, Tony Lawrence, definitely one of the greatest characters in the film.
It made me want to know, who is he? And I mean, he's so good. What happened? There has to be a story within the story about him, because he's so good. He's beyond a lot of the folks that we see on television and entertainment today. And he's doing it live. He's flawless in the way that he handles things. So like I was kind of feeling earlier with the earlier question, there's so many, we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of a lot of the kind of subject matter things that are going to come out of this exploration of this moment. But that was one of them. Like, what happened to him? Where did he go after that? Did he relocate? I just, it left me wanting more, and I haven't really found a whole lot on him either. So I'd be curious to know if anybody knows more about what happened to Mr. Lawrence.
I was glad. I want to know too, because I mean, his fashions, I was here for him. At one point, he had on like this pink kind of satiny ruffle thing. And I was like, well, where did he get that? And he was able to always read the audience well. And there are lots of things we could say about him. But one of the things, when I heard your question, I was thinking about this really critical, I see him almost as a ringmaster. This is on top of all of the hustling he had to do to put this together and the curating, all of that. But him on stage is this really important role in so much of Black music as the MC, as the announcer. I'm thinking of people like Danny Ray with James Brown or Pee Wee Marquette at Birdland, right? That is not an incidental role to be able to kind of keep they outside. I don't know what the bathroom situation was. The man said it smelled like chicken and Afro sheen. To keep people in it while people are doing sound checks and, you know, tired of standing up, and to keep people involved is a skill in and of itself. And so part of what I saw in the film was someone who understood that assignment and executed it expertly well. And again, that's somebody who knows community, knows audience, knows what is required in that particular moment. And so I enjoyed watching him do that in between groups, you know what I'm saying? His witty banter, all of that, the way he would bring people up on the stage, that's a gift and a skill in and of itself. And so I thought we saw that on display, and that was just as talented and brilliant as the artists who were performing.
Well, once again, I don't have anything to add to that. I don't think. What I was thinking is the hustling, right? You know, today there's almost always a connotation of criminality, and you know, street didn't always mean that. You know, it could encompass it, but street didn't necessarily mean what it means today. And so, you know, this is a concept of hustling, you know, very much as the way Dr. Hadley mentioned it, right? You know, so we're talking about a variety of skills that actually comes from that's rooted in the actual experience of the people in the neighborhoods. In other words, you ain't gonna get this in a theory class, right? You know, right? There's an organic intellectualism, you might say, or a variation of that, you know. And so, yeah, I'm like, but you all have said everything, so.
Being cool is hard work. That's really what I think. Dr. Bolden was saying. Being cool is from the streets. It's hard work. It requires a lot of discipline that most folks don't have. And think about all the distraction and craziness that he had to deal with as ringmaster. And that's why I said, why don't I know who this person is? Because he was so good. And never seemed to really be ruffled because there's people shouting over him, schedule changes, and he's, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And one second right there, I'm like, who is this brother?
Well, I want to give the last few minutes to any audience questions, because I know that some of you all probably have some questions for the panel. If you do have a question, it's hard for me to see everybody who's here. But
I have a question.
Oh, yes, sir. Go right ahead.
This isn't a question, but this has to do with B.B. King performing Standing Up. If you are a member of the College Language Association, you received a gift box, and it has a postcard showing B.B. King performing Standing Up in your CLA gift box. Thank you. Go CLA.
Proud member of CLA.
Yes, yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We are overwhelmed and enthused with the abundance of just luscious experiences and performances. But I have a question. And anyone, or if anyone had more, is there anybody you think was missing? Who was it that you think was the linchpin that you would have loved to see?
James Brown. I would love to see James Brown in that environment because in so many situations that James Brown has these big performances, he is the one in charge, right? He is, so like we look at the Boston concert, he's the, like when they say, let me talk to the manager, he is the manager. So I would love to see James Brown in a more cooperative kind of setting. We saw that in Zaire with the festivals there, but this, I think this kind of documentary lays bare so many other kind of unspoken interactions with others because he toured so much as his own unit, a self-contained kind of review. I would have loved to have seen him in this kind of environment just to kind of look at both how he navigated it, but also how the people responded to him in '69.
You know what's interesting about you wanting to see James Brown is that in the film, Alan Leeds, who was James Brown's, on his management team in 1969, is interviewed in Summer of Soul. So I wonder, was James Brown asked? Maybe he was. And to answer that question, there was a lot of footage that was not used, and I got a quick glimpse at some of the performances and artists that did not make it to the film for whatever reason, whether that be clearances or whatever. And apparently there was a beauty pageant at the Harlem Cultural Festival. I would have loved to have seen some of that. I think that would have been special to look at.
I would have loved to have seen a live performance from The Last Poets, because Nina Simone reads one of the poems and songs from one of the original members of The Last Poets, if I'm not mistaken. So I would have loved to seen them on stage together. And I don't know if that's in the footage that didn't make it, but I would have loved to seen that. That's just my 2 cents.
My first thought was, it's hard to say because it's finished and finite, and like you kind of appreciate it for what it was. But I think about, Aretha, because I think she's still in New York at that time. She hadn't moved to LA, and was so the moment with Mahalia and Mavis was perfect. But if there's somebody else who feels that same sense of loss, who's in that spiritual, same musical pool of brilliance, it would be Aretha, right? So that's just someone who came to mind, but I'm really appreciative for what it is. And like I said in the chat, I just want to see all of the footage from all of the performances, the beauty pageant, the people walking up, all of it.
Another thing to that is, Questlove Amir has been so excited about sharing his, tidbits, his personal tidbits about the film. And he tweeted that Mavis Staples was supposed to have been Aretha. Now, I don't remember what he said, whether she canceled or declined to do it or whatever, but it was supposed to have been Mahalia Jackson and Aretha Franklin. And I guess the staple singers were the fill-in, and beautifully so.
Wow. I would say Tina Turner, although, but Tina Turner. And I really am curious. I think I know how the crowd would have responded, to Ike and Tina Turner, because they were huge at that time. But curiously, what I'm curious about, so that's like what I'd like to see, but who I'm curious about is Jimi Hendrix. And, we know, he tried to, he wasn't allowed, but I would have, because, and he really, it's around this time that, he has become, the fact that he's separated, from, Black audiences is, really bothering him. And, at that time, should I say this or not? I'll say it. So at that time, basically, a lot of us, the cats from the hood, put it that way, or in those days, it was called ghetto. So we would listen to Jimi Hendrix when we got high. That was the way you dealt with him, So he was cool for street dudes. He was cool, but that was the way you enjoyed it. And so not everybody was into him, but there were people who were. So, and it would have been interesting. I don't remember when exactly he gets the band of gypsies together. That might have been right before, that band is, but still, because he's Jimi Hendrix, and, he played in the South and all over and understood, Black audience. It would have been, I would have really liked to see him get the opportunity, to shine and to see how people would have responded to him.
And Jimmy would play Harlem later that same year in September. So he would get to come to Harlem, but in a different venue.
Someone has a question, but they can't. She's at work listening. Thank you for your interest and commitment. She said, to piggyback on another question, which current artist would fit in with a Harlem Festival vibe today? And who would Gladys Knight or Mavis Staples pass the baton to?
So I'll say, a couple years ago, 2019, they did a 50th anniversary concert commemoration in Marcus Garvey Park, and brought together a pretty diverse group of Black artists. And I wasn't able to attend, but by all accounts, people really enjoyed it. I think when asking that kind of question, it's complicated because it's not just about swapping out the artists, but really thinking about what Harlem is and where Harlem is at this particular moment. And Harlem in 2021 is very different from Harlem in 1969, right? And the people who were the attendees and the commentators in the film, they were folks who were, in their late teens, early 20s. And so thinking about who is resonant with that group of young people as well. And so I don't know if I have, a really kind of well set roster of artists. I know that it is, if the question is, how would we create something in Harlem, a Harlem Cultural Festival that speaks to the needs of Harlem in 2021, I think that would be the guiding light of a question, as opposed to how do we swap out, who is the 2021 Gladys Knight or, Mavis Staple or like that. I think that's where we would set ourselves up for creating something that feels anachronistic and not well fitted, as opposed to, who has the ability to really speak to the heart of the community right now as it exists in 2021. That's a more complicated question, but ultimately provides a more rewarding answer. And I will say, I think that there are young people and artists who could absolutely do that. I live in Brooklyn. I don't live in Harlem, but somebody mentioned the dynamics of gentrification. That's certainly an element of what's going on. But still, a lot of those folks that we saw in the documentary who are now in their 60s and 70s, they're still around in Harlem too. And we talked about the intergenerational nature of the audience itself. So I think it would take some real thinking. But I will say this too, especially before the pandemic, there were venues like Harlem Stage and the Schomburg in Harlem, which think about these things deeply. And so just a plug for them, and I don't work for either one, but their programming does the hard work and the groundwork of trying to create things that represent the complexity of Harlem at the present moment. So just check out what those two organizations are doing.
I also wonder sometimes with a question like that, because there's a way that when talking about golden ages or classic ages, periods of time in which music is thought of as at a higher, more elevated form of expression, sometimes that's really what people are asking, like, there's no Gladys Knight today. And I think what I hear in the answer somewhere is really getting in touch with whoever resonates that kind of feeling with even another generation of listeners. And it may be very, very different. The answer might not sound very close to what we saw, but that might be that kind of dynamic constitution of what soul is, if we kind of rally around the idea of what it does and how it makes people feel. Then it's not going to be a kind of quantifiable, singular, sonic reality in as much as it's about the relationships between the sound, what that vibration does to and for people.
One question, in light of gentrification, can something like that festival be done again?
In New York specifically, the answer is like yes and no. New York is probably one of the best cities in the United States at putting on outdoor free concerts. So, you know, I talked about how Parks, New York Parks Department is still really great. Summer Stage is coming back after COVID year. And so you have all of that. But that also represents a certain type of city sanctioned programming. Even if it's amazing, it's vouched for by the city of New York. So we have to hold that reality in tension with events like Sunday Sermon in Harlem or Soul Summit in Brooklyn, which are sort of grassroots Black music events that used to happen with a lot more regularity, that were free and happened several times over the course of the summer, organized by Black people in these Black neighborhoods for Black community, right? Gentrification has directly impacted both of those events. And now they happen far less frequently, if they happen at all, right? And those events represent Black people kind of deciding for themselves what kind of musical experiences they need. So I wrote an article a few years ago called In Defense of Loud Black Summers, which was really looking at the policing of Black sound and Black music in summertime New York City and the kind of consequences of that. And when we're tempted to be flippant about it or think that it's not a serious matter, we think about people like Jordan Davis, who was killed because his music was too loud in Florida. And so this idea of both Black gathering and Black noise or Black sound is a really charged one, particularly in such densely packed cities and gentrifying cities like New York City.
The other question that's in the chat, where would you all say Summer of Soul falls in the pantheon of concert films?
I mean, way at the top. And I'm going to give a couple reasons that have nothing to do with the performances. The sound mixing, stellar. That's why when Questlove is on the social media saying, please see it at a theater if you can. There's a local sound engineer here in New Orleans who said, you know, it shook him how incredible the sound mixing was done. And then the fact that it is more than just a concert film, you know, it is a history film. And I've already contacted the distributors because I intend to have my history of urban music students watch this film, not because they're going to get excited over these artists, because quite honestly, they are going in not knowing who any of them are, but because it gives a snapshot of Black and brown people and Black history in 1969. And, you know, I told a friend of mine, if you leave out of the theater, wherever you see it, just having seen wonderful performances and the rest of it goes over your head, then you have missed the entire point of the film as being an educational document.
You know, I'm wondering, Chris, if we should should we think of this as a concert film? And what I mean by that is it's as much a documentary about a concert moment as it is a concert film, where there's a lot less walking you through the meaning, telling you the story of the time period, all those advantages that you have when you're really documenting and actually making the case for something to be actually thought of in much bigger terms than just the performances, as Melissa says. I also want to be careful about we're still at a very early stage where we're getting these newer technologies that are going to allow us to do the wider restorative project of documenting these kinds of stories. Watch Stacks is its own thing because actually it was made and they curated the whole dialogue on Black culture at that time. I mean, which of course by our standards today may or may not satisfy what we would think as sort of high technical engagement. But they were trying to act, it's almost like they had a time machine and knew you guys are gonna have to know why this thing is even important. So we're gonna actually just tell you that now, which is really interesting. And then we got this process now where the person the archive is not just written, so we get trained if we're in traditional disciplines to go to the Schomburg and sit and find that pearl. And there's a whole nother treasure hunt now with sound and experiential things that we can document through other forms of media. And I think that what this documentary shows, it exposes to the world the rich things that are actually there. But I like the fact that Questlove ended by saying, now he's found a purpose. That he's actually, he didn't say this was the end. For him, it sounded like it was the beginning of a journey that he wants to commit to, because he knows that this happened here and it happened in so many other places, and we've got to excavate and be almost archaeological and restorative in the way that we encounter trying to share this powerful thing called the Black cultural experience.
Well, I don't know if I would, I don't know if I would say, make a qualitative assessment. That I'd leave that for other people. I think, to me, what is really, or one of the things that's really important, is sort of it shows people why this particular period of music was so important. I'm going to say the obvious. I hope this doesn't happen, but there are people on here. Dr. Brown knows. I've been watching the far right in this country for a long time, and I ain't been too far off for too many years, right? So these people are serious, and they don't like nobody. They don't even like a lot of themselves, and so we tend to think, we as just people, we tend to think that time, that things get better with time automatically, and that's not necessarily the case. What our people were able to accomplish at that particular time, was really significant. And the real story of where the people were and how they felt, what their views were, their sensibilities, and actually how that came about, how, not just why, but how, we were able to accomplish this, is all in the film. Stevie Wonder is interviewed, and he talks about, do you want to say this? You don't want your, career, it might impact sales. And he essentially says that there's something more important to him in terms of making music. That's not his primary, criterion of what he's about. This is the story of what it felt like to achieve a certain amount of freedom, and also what wasn't achieved. This is the story, right? And the fact that it wasn't, that there wasn't sufficient interest to promote it is a statement, and just to make a point, right? So his name is slipping my my mind now. Abby Lincoln's husband, the great drummer, Max Roach. So we talk about Max Roach, and we insist in the Freedom Now. But a couple years before that, Sonny Rollins, released the Freedom Now, the first one. I think I think Max Roach is on that album. But the point is that Rollins wrote. He dedicated the entire song, the one entire side, to that title. And he wrote his own liner notes where he talked about Black people as having contributed, significantly to popular culture, not being credited for it, and that in the larger sense that we had contributed to the humanities and had been treated in an inhumane manner. And Orrin Keepnews, the producer and part owner, took the album off the shelf. I know some of you know the story, but the others might not, and it's being recorded. So took the album off the shelf, retitled it, and inserted his own liner notes. So, this is the music that on a broad scale that really reflects what it felt like at that particular time, and yet really this is the music that's generally been neglected. We got a whole bunch about avant-garde, all the music. I love all the music, but I mean, and I'll just get off my soapbox, but that's why I think it's really important.
The one thing I was going to mention is that I was this close to calling up Jimmy Douglas, who was the person who was responsible for the mixing of the music of the film. He's affectionately known as the Senator for people who may not know. And he has been around since 1969. He does not look it. The man is phenomenal. I've had the pleasure of interviewing him a few times. He will tell you he's had about 2 or 3 different careers in the span of 50 years. So, but yeah, we all have Jimmy to thank for that sound quality for the film. I see that. Yep, that's right, Scott. Well, I see we're 9 minutes past 7. I don't see any more questions.
I see one from Sarah that's speaking to my heart.
Oh, okay. Let me go back into the chat. Sorry, I missed that one. Do we know any? Thank you, Melissa. Do we know any more about why this footage was not available until recently? From the film, it felt like there was more to the story But of course, it is so hard to delve into every question and topic fully in one film.
Yes, if I can speak to that. So yeah, I believe Hal Tulchin, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who shot the film and discussed, early in the film how he wanted to use the sun because he didn't have a huge budget, he didn't have lights, and he needed the sun and where the stage placement and all of that. And then at the end of the film, when he comes back and says how he tried to sell the film, how Woodstock was a huge, huge deal. So he titled his footage Black Woodstock, got no interest, and then it sat in his house untouched. And this speaks to me as the archives professional. This film speaks to the power of archives, because do you know how many people would have thrown that in the trash? And so we are thankful to him for keeping it, but recognizing its worth. Well, I actually know I'm going to push back against that, because he could have given it to an archives so that it would have been accessible. But thank God that the producers of the film and Amir Thompson, who we know as Questlove, did digging. From what I know, there's a decades-long process of getting to this. The subtitle of the film is "Or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised." And it is the power of archival material that we have this material, that we can sit here and rejoice that we can see it. But if he had thrown it away, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So remember, archive our stories so that they're not forgotten.
Scott, did you have anything?
I was gonna say that might be the way. That might have summed it all up.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to put a bow on it and end everything. First, I want to thank the panelists again for y'all's time and your willingness to participate in this. It just came from an idea, but it turned into this because Melissa was just like, you need to turn this into an event. I was like, okay. So many thanks to her for the extra push, and thank you all for coming this evening. This has been a real joy. I love things and programs like this. I've learned a great deal tonight, and I hope everyone who's attended has done the same.